My name is Carla Fletcher, and I'm a research consultant at Trellis Strategies. I've been a higher education researcher for about 2 decades, and I've been at Trellis for 18 of those years. In that time, I've led numerous projects on student loan default and repayment, college affordability, and student success using a variety of methodologies. My more recent work has been centered on higher education policy and student wellness. So today I'm going to share some student wellness stats that come from Trellis's annual Student Financial Wellness Survey. So I'm going to start by talking about what the survey is, and then I'll discuss results related to student well-being, financial insecurity, student personas, and return on investment. And then at the end, I'll briefly talk about how schools can participate in the survey. So one of our flagship projects and key sources of insights here at Trellis Strategies is the Student Financial Wellness Survey. We also call it SFWS, or simply just Wellness Survey. This is a comprehensive self-reported online instrument that's completely free to institutions of higher education to participate. Trellis provides this service as part of our nonprofit community investment work. Trellis uses the survey results to produce free customized reports and infographics for the participating schools. And we also aggregate the data to create public-facing reports on various topics from the survey. And institutions have used the results to do things like raise money, develop programs, assess their initiatives, assign resources, and build a culture of caring on campus to better support and love their students. And we've fielded this survey every year since 2018, but today I'm going to talk about the findings resulting from the 142 colleges and universities that participated in the fall 2023 survey. We had over 62,000 responses from over 700,000 students that we sent invitations to. And before diving into the findings, I want to give a brief overview of what these respondents looked like. In terms of race and ethnicity, 44% were white, 25% were Hispanic or Latino, and 15% were Black, and then smaller percentages for other groups are listed on there as well. About half of the respondents were in their first year with less than 30 credits. A little over half of the responding students were attending two-year institutions, so I think that contributes to that median class year that we see here. As we see in pretty much all voluntary surveys, female students are usually overrepresented. We see that here as well, with 74% of our respondents being female. The average age of our respondent was 25.5, and the average GPA was 3.1, and a slim majority of our respondents were attending full-time. Beyond these basic demographics, we also collect information on whether the student belongs to certain populations that are often more at risk of experiencing barriers to success in their higher education journey. So this includes first-generation students. 36% of our respondents said that they were first in their immediate family to attend college. First-generation students may need more help understanding how to navigate the higher education landscape because they don't have that family knowledge to guide them through. 21% of our respondents said that they were a parent to one or more children. These students are more likely to struggle with financial insecurity and basic needs insecurity compared to their childless peers. 68% of surveyed students were working for pay while enrolled. Students who work may see themselves as workers first and then as students second. And when that student persona is a lower priority, it may become more difficult to focus on academics and persist to graduation. 2% of our 2023 respondents reported being a former foster youth. Now, while this is a very small percentage of the population, these students often lack the financial means, stability, and support to be successful in college. In fact, fewer than 1 in 10 former foster youth hold any kind of college credential. So this population is very vulnerable and needs special attention and interventions to thrive. And 15% of our respondents identified as LGBTQIA+. And research has shown that this population encounters higher rates of discrimination, social stigma, basic needs insecurity, and mental health challenges compared to their peers. So we know that going to college can be a rewarding and fulfilling experience, but it can also come with many challenges and difficulties. Many students face hardships and stressors that affect their academic performance, their mental health, and their basic needs. In this section, I'll explore some of the data on student well-being in college, focusing on 4 key areas: food security, housing security, homelessness, and mental health. So let's start with our food security. In our survey, we use a short-form validated scale from the U.S. Department of Agriculture to measure the prevalence of food security in the prior 30 days prior to the respondent taking the survey. Timing-wise, with the survey open in late October to mid-November, this means that students have mostly already received their aid packages and they're in the swing of things for the semester. And looking at this metric, we see that more than 2 in 5 students had low or very low food security, and the rates are pretty much identical between the two sectors here, the 2-year and the 4-year. And we see that 23% of students were experiencing very low food security. That's the most extreme form of the condition. And with that, we often see severely disrupted eating patterns and reduced food intake. Now, many colleges have implemented on-campus food pantries to help address this crisis of food insecurity and hunger among their students. The pantries, they often offer more than just food. They can offer things like personal hygiene products, toiletries, even personnel that can help them apply to benefits programs. And they're a lot more common now than they used to be. In 2012, there were just 80 food pantries on college campuses across the country, and today there's more than 800. So of the 142 institutions that participated in our 2023 survey, 122 had at least one food pantry or closet available to students on their campus, and that's about 86% of our participating institutions. And when we limit the analysis to just the students attending those 86% of the institutions, we found that 53% either did not know about the food pantry or they indicated incorrectly that their campus didn't have one. So despite these high rates of food insecurity that we saw on the prior slide, only 15% of respondents reported visiting a food pantry, either on campus or off campus. And there could be a lot of reasons for this: stigma, time constraints, shame, even feeling like you're not needy enough to use the resources. We've heard that from students over the years, saying that they didn't feel like they had enough need, that there were others who needed the food more. So that is a problem as well. And then obviously, at least as far as the on-campus food pantry goes, awareness is part of the issue as well. All right, our next area of student well-being focuses on housing security. This is a range of complex housing issues that can include things like the inability to pay rent or mortgage, or the inability to pay utilities, living in an overcrowded space, and in its most extreme form, experiencing homelessness. In the 2023 survey, we saw 42% of students report housing insecurity through their responses to the scale, and 14% were identified as homeless. In our homelessness scale, we consider couch surfing to be a form of homelessness. That's where the student is staying temporarily with friends or relatives while they look for stable housing. Students in these situations, they don't often consider themselves to be homeless while they're going through it, but we believe that they are if they don't have that stable and secure housing. In a situation like that, they're having to spend time and energy on figuring out their housing situation, and that's going to take away from their ability to focus on school and other things going on in their lives. And then when we look at overall basic needs and security, we see that many college students struggle with one or more of these in the same time frame. In the 2023 implementation of our survey, 58% of surveyed students experienced either food insecurity, housing insecurity, or homelessness, or more than one of those in the prior 12 months. Additionally, 29% of the students who answered the survey said that they had experienced both food and housing insecurity. That's almost a third. And then overall, we found that 9% had dealt with all three forms of insecurity that we measure: food insecurity, housing insecurity, and homelessness in the past year. With such high percentages of students facing basic needs insecurities that put their academic potential, health, and future at risk, it's essential for institutions, communities, and policymakers to come together and take action to provide targeted supports. Now, on this slide, we're looking at the prevalence of overall basic needs insecurity by certain student groups, here looking at LGBTQIA+ students and parenting students. Nearly 7 in 10 LGBTQIA+ students were facing at least one form of basic needs insecurity. 37% were both food and housing insecure, and 14% were contending with all three conditions. Parenting students also face unique challenges that contribute to a higher risk of basic needs insecurities, including additional financial responsibilities with those children and time constraints due to their familial responsibilities. And we see this reflected in our data. 69% were facing one or more forms of basic needs insecurity. 42% had been both food and housing insecure, and 12% had dealt with all three. So with both of these groups, that is higher, sometimes much higher than what we see among the overall average student respondent. And then pivoting to our last focus area for this section, here at Trellis, we consider mental health to be a fundamental basic need, pivotal to student success and personal welfare. Good mental health is essential for individuals to feel safe, to develop healthy relationships, and a positive sense of self-worth. When compared to the general adult population in the United States, college students are at higher risk of experiencing mental health concerns, including heightened levels of loneliness, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. These conditions can have long-lasting consequences on students' lives, including their energy, cognitive ability, relationships with loved ones, and their academic success. So with this in mind, the Student Financial Wellness Survey includes two short-form validated scales, the PHQ-2, or the Patient Health Questionnaire 2, which measures the frequency of depressed mood, and the GAD-2, which screens for generalized anxiety disorder. So using these two scales, our team found that mental health concerns, just like food and housing challenges, were common among our respondents. In the 14 days leading up to the survey, 32% of respondents reported experiencing symptoms of major depressive disorder, and 43% had experienced anxiety. Now, viewing mental health as a basic need is crucial because it significantly affects academic performance, happiness, and overall well-being. So what does the mental health of basic needs insecure students look like? On both of these charts, the dark blue represents respondents who were dealing with at least one basic needs insecurity, and the orange bar are those who were not, their basic needs secure. And we can see clearly that those students experiencing basic needs insecurity were more likely to have a positive screen for generalized anxiety disorder and major depressive disorder by a magnitude of over 20 percentage points. Now, for mental health services, we also ask a similar question like the one we do for food pantries about awareness. Compared to food pantries, there does seem to be a little more general awareness of mental health services, but still around a third of respondents were unaware that their school had mental health services available to their students. And again, this analysis is restricted to the institutions that had those types of services available. It could be on-campus counselors, it could be telehealth appointments, or anything really in between. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next section where we're going to look at some more general financial insecurity measures. The basic needs stats that I just covered are a good proxy for financial insecurity, but students can feel financial stressors without it being so dire that it impacts their basic needs, but can still be problematic. So we do want to highlight that as well. So we can step back a bit here and look more broadly at financial insecurity. A little more than half of the respondents in our survey said they would have trouble getting $500 in cash or credit in the next month if an emergency came up. In the chart, you can see that the two-year respondents on average have a little bit more financial insecurity, with 59% saying they'd have trouble getting $500 compared to 52% of our four-year respondents. We also asked respondents a hypothetical question. If you had that $500 emergency in the next month, what resource would you turn to first to pay that cost? Respondents said they would use things like their savings, or they'd turn to family, or they'd use a credit card or delay paying a bill. But 18% of respondents overall said they would not be able to get $500 from any resource if an emergency happened. And that's obviously very concerning. Now, looking at this $500 question by some different subgroups of students shows those who may be even a little more financially vulnerable. First-generation students, parenting students, and students who identify as LGBTQIA+ were more likely than their peers to say they would have trouble getting $500 in case of an emergency. Now, most students said they had run out of money at least once during 2023. We define running out of money in the survey as exhausting available funds and not being able to afford regular expenses. 2/3 of respondents had run out of money at least once during the year. 23% said they'd run out of money 8 or more times between the beginning of the year and late October or early November when they're filling out the survey. And we see some big differences here for some of those student groups that we were looking at in the last slide. 27% of first-generation students had run out of money 8 or more times in the past year, compared to just 16% of their non-first-generation peers. And then parenting students had an even larger gap. 33%, a third, of parenting students had run out of money 8 or more times, compared to 16% of non-parenting students. And more than half of respondents said they worried about being able to pay their current monthly expenses. Only about 25% disagreed or strongly disagreed that they worry about this, so only about a quarter of respondents were feeling comfortable that they're able to pay their current monthly expenses comfortably. Now, in this next section, I'm going to talk more in depth about a couple of specific student personas. Many students have other priorities in their lives that can pull time away from their academics. And one big one is working while enrolled. Just over 2/3 of respondents said that they were working for pay while enrolled. And working students are putting in a lot of work hours. 41% reported working 40 or more hours in a typical 7-day week. And another 41% were working 20 to 39 hours. So that's a lot of hours that students are putting into work while they're going through school. And this can impact how they view themselves and in turn, how they set their priorities. 38% of students who worked while enrolled considered themselves to be workers who go to school rather than students who work. This was particularly true among community college respondents, where almost half of working students consider themselves to be workers, compared to less than a third among the 4-year respondents. A quarter of working students said that they had missed at least one day of class in the prior spring semester due to conflicts with their job. So you can really see the prioritization here. Those students were choosing working over school in cases where the schedules conflicted. They needed that job. They need to keep the paycheck coming in and be able to pay the bills and be able to keep paying for school as well. Another important persona is being a parent. 21% of our respondents reported being a parent, and this is more common in the 2-year sector, with 27% of our 2-year respondents saying that they were parents, compared to 14% of our 4-year respondents. And student parents, on average, look pretty different from non-parenting students in a lot of ways. Student parents were more likely to use credit sources to help pay for school. They were way more likely to borrow student loans, and also more likely to use a credit card compared to their non-parenting students to pay for school. Parenting students were also less likely to have financial support from family, less likely to have a scholarship, and less likely to use savings to help pay for school. Parenting students had worse credit card behavior. They were less likely to say they always pay their credit card bill on time, and far less likely to say they fully pay off their credit card balance each month. In fact, almost all of the parenting students in our survey said that they were carrying balances over month to month because they're not paying off that balance in full each month. Parenting students are more financially insecure. Higher percentages say that they would have trouble getting $500, that they would not be able to get $500 from any resource in case of an emergency. Higher percentages had run out of money during the year and say that their total debt is unmanageable. And as we saw earlier, higher percentages experienced food and housing insecurity, including homelessness. Parenting students were also more likely to be first-generation students and more likely to be attending only online or remote classes, and that can have implications for their sense of belonging and their overall college experience. Student parents, like working parents, already experience some amount of time poverty, and these financial and social barriers can further complicate their path to a credential. And then briefly here, I just wanted to show some stats on the intersection of working students and parenting students. Parenting students were far more likely to consider themselves workers who go to school rather than students who work. And this is among students who said that they work. Almost 2/3 of parenting students who worked considered themselves to be workers instead of students first, compared to just 30% of the non-parenting students who worked. Parenting students also put in way more working hours. About 2/3 of parenting students who worked reported spending 40 or more hours per week at their job, compared to only about a third of non-parenting students. So you can see from this that a lot of students have these intersecting personas that each demand time and attention. And then to wrap up the survey results, I just want to talk a bit about how students feel about their institution and their educational decisions. And so we'll start by looking at the importance of cost to students as they decide where to enroll. Most students said cost was an important or very important factor in deciding to attend their institution. Just over half said it was very important, and another just over a quarter said it was important. Very few said that cost was not important, and these numbers were consistent across the 2-year and 4-year sector. A majority of respondents felt that their school has the support services to help them address their financial situation. More so in the 2-year sector than the 4-year sector, but overall, less than 40% of respondents in both sectors believe that their school is aware of the financial challenges that they face. Now, this could be in part because some students just aren't reaching out to people on campus about their financial situation. We see that 33% of 2-year respondents and 38% of 4-year respondents said that they had not talked to anyone on campus about their financial struggles. Of those who do, they most commonly reported speaking with a financial aid advisor, but many also sought advice from officials who are not typically experts in financial aid, like academic advisors, faculty members, or other staff. So what we see from this is that students may approach whoever they feel comfortable with on campus. So it's important that faculty and staff know where and how to direct students who need help. Now on this slide, we feature a customer satisfaction rating that's used across many businesses, sectors, and industries. It's called a Net Promoter Score, or an NPS. You've probably answered it a million times with all the different products and services that you use. We ask students to rate their willingness to recommend their institution to others on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 through 6 are the detractors. Those are the students who probably had negative experiences, and if they're talking with other people about their school, it's probably in a somewhat negative way. 7s and 8s are passives, and 9s and 10s are classified as promoters. And then you calculate it by subtracting the percentage of detractors from the percentage of promoters, and you ignore the passives. And as you can see here, the 2-year sector typically gets higher NPS ratings than the 4-year schools, but anything positive is considered good. Both of these scores are good, and students would generally recommend their school to others. And most students do see their education as worth the investment. 72% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that the cost of college is a good investment for their financial future. And 83% said that their family agreed or strongly agreed that a college degree is worth the investment. So of course, these questions are being asked of people who are currently attending college, but there's still positive numbers to see. And then to finish up, I just want to talk briefly about how institutions can participate in future survey implementations. I'll start by talking about what schools get for their participation. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is a free survey, and we encourage any institution to participate. Each school will receive a report of their student survey responses alongside a comparison group made up of all of the participating schools from your same sector. So a community college would have a comparison group of all of the community colleges that participated in the survey that you can compare and benchmark against. We also create a 1-page infographic that highlights some of the key findings in a nice visual format that's easy to share and quick to read. And we can also do some additional analyses on your school's data if you want to drill down into certain student populations or issues. And we're always happy to present on your school's findings to campus stakeholders. And then Trellis uses the aggregated data to publish reports on various topics important in the higher ed space. And we put those reports on our website and get the word out through social media and our monthly newsletter. This is our timeline. There are dates on this page that are specific to the 2024 survey, but this is generally what our timeline for the survey looks like every year, and the dates just shift slightly to account for the new calendar year. So we are in our recruitment period right now. We're having conversations with schools about the survey, doing webinars and presentations like these. And then we onboard schools leading up to the September 23rd deadline to complete all steps. And then we launch the survey on October 21st this year. And then in the spring, we deliver the customized reports and infographics. And schools also have an opportunity to participate in a further analysis of student outcomes. And that is a supplement to the Student Financial Wellness Survey. It connects the survey responses of your students to the institutional data on student success metrics that you have. These metrics include satisfactory academic progress, GPA, and retention or graduation. And we do like to see a little time pass to see how the students fare in school. So for the schools that participate in the fall 2024 survey, they would receive their report the following spring. And then by fall of 26, they would provide us with the additional institutional data on student success metrics for those students who had been surveyed in fall of 24. We would connect those, conduct the analysis, and create a report. So it's just another benefit of participating in the Student Financial Wellness Survey. This analysis does have a nominal cost. It is optional. And the decision to do the analysis does not need to be made upfront. It can be decided much later after receiving your survey report. So to learn more, you can go to trellisstrategies.org/SFWS to get information about the survey. The QR code takes you to the same site. The website outlines the participation process in more detail. It answers some FAQs. It has some promotional documents to help make the case to take the survey. There's also a short form on the website to connect with us. If you have questions or you want to sign up, you just put in your name, email, and institution, and it will send us a notification. Or you can email sfwsrequest@trellisstrategies.org on the bottom of the page here. Both the form and the email go to the same place. So either way will get to us. And with that, that's all I have prepared. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'm happy to take any questions there might be. I'll go back to that one.
Well, first off, thanks so much for all this just really, really good and deep data that you have here, Carla. The information here was just so enlightening. There were so many pieces that I actually just took for myself that I just thought was really helpful to understand. The first being, you mentioned that 1 in 11 students had all 3 forms of insecurities. That was just mind blowing to think about the fact that you're really trying to navigate these things in silos, but there are such a huge percentage of students that are dealing with it all at once. The second thing that I took down as just a keynote for myself at least was that, and this was really interesting, was that there were so many students that you polled that you asked, why haven't you ever, maybe visited the food pantry or, asked for financial aid support or those types of things. And one of the responses being that so many of them, despite knowing what their circumstances are, weren't necessarily sure if their circumstances qualified for being dire enough to need those resources. These are just kind of things that you really want to think about as you're, trying to support these students and recognize kind of what's going on in their mindset and what's going on in their head. I also liked hearing that you said that parents were 2 times as likely to say that they were workers going to school as non-parents, who were 2 times as likely to say they were students going to work. Just kind of thinking about how that can be such a mindset shift for them. So anyway, just so much really good insight and good information there. I really appreciate you sharing some of those. For anyone who has any questions here for Carla, certainly feel free to put them in the Q&A. Again, just right there at the bottom of the screen there, and we'll make sure to get to them. I just wanted to start off with a couple of questions that I know that we had. So going back to this morning, our keynote speaker, Jason Palmer, mentioned that in one of their studies that they did, they found that emergency financial aid was actually even more effective than traditional financial aid at retaining students. And so in the research that you all have done at Trellis, we just wanted to understand, is this something that you've been able to see as well? And if so, what were some of the most effective ways in which you were able to see that students accessed emergency financial aid? Were there certain forms that worked well? Was it making sure that they, the staff members and faculty members were able to tell them about it? Just if there was anything like that you might be able to shine from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's bringing up student parents. They were twice as likely to use emergency aid or to receive emergency aid as non-parents. So it's an interesting note that, it really does point out their financial insecurity that they're displaying. So I know that it's hard to get to it from our sort of one-time survey. We don't really dive into it, but I've talked with schools about how important it is to catch students early on. So they have, an issue, they have a childcare issue, or their car breaks down or something. If that's not addressed up front, and of course the student has to let the school know, the school doesn't know that, by osmosis, but if that's not dealt with up front, it might snowball into so many other issues. And then the school might lose that student because they feel like they, absolutely can't stay because they have all these additional issues that pop up. So I know schools have told me they find that if they can address the immediate first thing that comes up, that really does help the students kind of get back on track with their finances, their personal life, and that helps them stay in school. So I think it is very important. And I know there's a lot of different ways that schools use their emergency aid programs, as far as the forms, as far as letting students know about it. And I don't know what the best way is, but it's super important that students are aware that this thing exists and that the process does not have a lot of barriers. They need to be able to get that funding quickly, if that goes to them, if that goes to the car shop, whatever way the school does it, just getting that done quickly so that the student doesn't have that barrier anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. And definitely really I think hitting the nail on the head again with parents in particular, that they're twice as likely to actually access that emergency aid funding, just shows how much more that is part of the overall experience for students who are student parents. There's also another question that came in. Someone asked, do you have any data on career/placement anxiety?
We don't. We are starting to try to figure out how to include workforce or post-college, I guess, things into the survey. Is like this past year we had an open-ended that asked what they thought their salary might be, and as you can imagine, the answers were all over the place. So for this next year, we're going to have ranges that they can choose from, and so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. But that, we're trying to just get a sense of, do people, does it seem reasonable? Do they think they're going to make almost nothing or a ton of money? So that doesn't get too anxiety, but I think we are kind of working our way towards what does post-college look like? We're getting the surveys really focused on like an in-college experience, what they're experiencing right at that moment. But I think asking questions about what are you feeling right now about the future is valid also. And so I think that'd be a great thing to work our way towards.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I do have another question. So, kind of thinking back to the very beginning of the presentation that you gave, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was really kind of taking a look at the mental health aspect in particular and how it increased with the levels of food insecurity that students were having, which of course makes a ton of sense. I think a lot of times we tend to kind of look at, students in certain kind of buckets and descriptors of, food insecure, needing emergency financial aid services, mental health or anxiety, not necessarily like recognizing the fact that mental health anxiety is not just another bucket, it's an outcome of these uh, these circumstances that these students are kind of falling within as well. So one question I have is that you mentioned that across the campuses you've looked at, you've seen an increase in terms of, food pantries and things like that that are being provided. Have you also seen an increase in other types of services that schools are starting to make available to their students, that are helping to solve for so many of these other characteristics that they're dealing with?
Yeah, there's been a huge increase on campus for those student support services, the mental health, or even just like connecting with housing or that emergency aid. All that stuff has definitely been increasing on campuses. I think that institutions are now kind of seeing that if students are having these struggles, financial struggles or otherwise in their personal life, it bleeds over into the academics. You can't separate it. And it's not all things that institution can solve. Like not having affordable housing is not necessarily something an institution can help when you're living in a city that has really unaffordable housing. But anything they can do to help students, connect them with resources to improve that is obviously going to help them stay in school. And so that's better for the institution. And that, talking about the silos, I think is really important because yeah, when you address the one thing, you know, a student says that they're having trouble getting food, and that gets addressed by going to the food pantry, they might be having trouble having food as well as some other things that they didn't bring up. And so having sort of a case management style of support for students can be helpful for those students who are having broader issues, so that can all be connected because they are all connected for the student.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that harkens back to our last presentation where I remember they were talking about having that ACE at email, which was about trying to make it where there's just one place that students know that they can kind of go to get that case management type help. Absolutely critical for what students need. There was one person who jumped in and asked, how/who can we get in touch for more information in assisting food pantries at our local institutions? I've heard that a local community college, Fullerton College, may be losing their current supporters and may need to close.
Ooh, that's a good question. That is a great question. I wish I had a great answer for it. We, on our end, we provide the data to help schools make the case for funding, but I actually am not 100% sure who all these funders are that are really supporting these efforts. And I would hope that it comes largely from institutional coffers, but they're, you know, I know a lot of them do also use outside funding. So that is the case. You know, if your school needs to make the case that the institution should support this, please take the survey and you'll get that data to show them.
That's true. That's true. And once again, the call out for that is SFWS request at trellisstrategies.org. So certainly, the more times we can be able to provide that insight, particularly to the decision makers, the better. Um, and then we also have another question here. I recently heard about adding thrift stores on campus to help the general population on campuses. Are you hearing anything about this becoming an affordable trend?
I hadn't heard anything about that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We had until this past year, we had a question on the survey about if to the students asking if they had ever needed to sell their possessions to make ends meet. And so that, you know, kind of makes me think in line with the thrift store situation where just institutions finding those support services to help students who are in these kind of more dire situations. So anything helps if that's great for those institutions that are finding success with that.
yeah, I completely agree as well. That's definitely an innovative concept there. So one last question before we let you go here. We know that there's been a lot of challenges with FAFSA this year. And so do you have a sense of what maybe that impact from 24 or 25 FAFSA might be on the survey results that you're seeing, as well as maybe even the financial wellness of students going forward?
Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting because I know that I think there's been projections that we think it's going to impact enrollments because people either got their aid packages very late or in some cases they maybe haven't gotten them yet. Things are still kind of up in the air, and so they might not be able to make decisions about their enrollments until they receive that, and maybe they won't enroll in the fall. So I think it's going to be really interesting where we survey currently enrolled students. So if there are a lot of students who are more financially insecure, but they don't end up enrolling because they had to make that decision, then, you know, we might see slight improvement in the survey, which will be interesting. But we are going to add a question to the survey, or we have already for fall 24, about if they encountered issues with FAFSA. We already asked some FAFSA questions currently, but we're going to add questions about if they've encountered issues and if they had any anxiety or had to make any different enrollment decisions because of it. And so I'm very curious to see how that turns out. Another part of what I do at Trellis is tracking FAFSA. And so I've been like very heavy in this space, seeing how we're still not where we need to be compared to where we were last year with FAFSA.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It seems hopefully that we might be closing the gap a little bit, but yeah, we still have a ways to go there for sure. Well, Carla, it's been really great hearing, just all this great data coming from Trellis, as well as you being able to share with us the great ways in which our partner institutions here, people on this call can participate, help to enrich the data sets, as well as help to learn a little bit about themselves as well. So thank you so much for your time. For anyone who's willing to, who's interested in participating in this, Carla Fletcher, research consultant over here at Trellis. You can reach her or her team at SFWS request at trellisstrategies.org. And learn some great things by participating for free. And thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much.